You see them as beautiful?
I don't know what the term means. I'm being really honest with you, because I think that could be framed in many different ways. For example, fashion design might see a different kind of beauty to a graphic designer.
Sure.
I don't know. I think what I try to do is put colour combinations together that I find interesting, and I also find I put colour combinations together which I find slightly awkward. I challenge myself. I think, can I really get away with that light yellowy green? Will it really? What kind of reaction will it have with the kind of blue and the kind of pale green? So there's a kind of a wrongness to the rightness. So it's a kind of, for me, I use the colour as an awkward formalism.
There's something that occurs to me that sort of, in terms of beautiful, I was having a conversation with Albert Erling, and I think Albert is almost a person who has been a big influence in your work. I think there's been similarities. I mean, not that I would mistake any of these paintings for his work, but that sense of sort of composition and that sense of almost sort of craziness, anything goes composition is a similarity. And I think when we were at college and sort of Albert and Martin Kippenberger were making work, they almost set their mission to make the most ugly goddamn work they possibly could.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was. They were out there to sort of challenge the world as to what was acceptable as a painting and how ugly could they possibly make it. And in many ways, sort of like Keith's art machine sort of did not similar things. And
What are you talking about?
It produced some of the ugliest paintings I've ever seen. That had head veils on it and had huge amounts of oil paint on it. So and it was a conceptual machine that was allowed to produce incredibly ugly objects. And the other day, Albert said, I don't want ugly paintings. I don't want to be surrounded by ugliness anymore. I'm fed up with it. I don't want it. I want beautiful. I want to make beautiful paintings. And he really meant that. And I think if you see his show at the moment,
Where?
Thomas Dane, you'll see that he does try and make beautiful paintings. And I think Keith has also been trying to make beautiful and succeeding in making very beautiful paintings as well. And Mike's paintings, I think, I mean, I don't know whether I would consider his earlier work, the cake paintings that he was making in the sort of 1990s, ugly, but I don't think I would consider them beautiful in the way that these are beautiful. They were the conceptual process.
They were very provocative.
Fairly ugly.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So do you think that's something to do with getting older, the fact that we've started making beautiful work, or do you think it's the fact that the art in society has changed, and now ugliness isn't de rigueur anymore?
I don't think it's got anything to do with that. I don't think, and I'm not sure that David's question has, to be honest with you. I think he's asking quite directly why I use decorative paints for decorative purposes. I think that it's kind of related to what he's saying, but
well, decorative could mean beautiful. I mean,
it could be tasteful in that kind of, magazine kind of way. I just want to paint. I think one of the other reasons I chose this paint is because it's not impasto. When I made the cake paintings, I was taking oil paint, huge tubs of oil paint, putting them into cake decorating tools and squeezing them out. Like turds, basically. And they were they were very impasto, but of course they were meant to take the piss out of those artists like de Kooning, like Auerbach, who really believed that the impasto was somehow a reflection of their inner soul. So I was taking the piss, and I think that now, going back to what Keith said about that kind of time at art school when you were almost told religiously that the painting was dead and the end of the world was nigh, and that there was no room for manoeuvre in terms of making painting. I responded to that, but now I think if I understand your question correctly, I think that I got very bored making them, because I just found that when you're running around like a punk rocker, just kicking shit out of an authority figure, like de Kooning, you get to a certain point where you do grow up and you just look a bit silly. And also, it gets very boring, because you realise that the world is actually more complex than that. And painting can be more complex and ask bigger, more complex questions about the world around you, outside what you know of art school, outside the studio. And that's why I chose decorative paint to somehow represent that. Partly because of their association with popular culture, but partly because,
Another question?
I was very interested in what Keith Tyson said about the sort of theoretical cul-de-sac. I graduated about 3 years ago, and definitely it seems that people who I talk to around the time, we feel, or some people feel, that we're kind of standing on a sort of 360 precipice of information. As a result of that, would you say that as a result of the kind of absolute mass of things to be looking at and to become a filter for, that aligning yourself to one medium like painting is therefore redundant?
I don't think anything is redundant myself. I think we have as every artist has a set of conditions, historical conditions that they're born into, and the urge to make art is there, and it will find a way, and that's kind of what we've all done. We've all in our condition, or now I guess a student's problem is that pluralism and just overload of information everywhere. How do you make an abstract painting when iTunes does such a beautiful animated thing, and you're taking one single frame of it and putting it in a frame and saying this is important, and it's not dynamic. And these are all difficult things to deal with, but painting will survive, and artists will survive, and they'll do that because I really believe there's something, this physicality, this analog condition of capturing your moment and the paint in the now. You take an abstract painting and I hit you over the head with it, it doesn't feel abstract. It's got presence, it's a thing.
But it's also interesting, just to add to that, it's one of the things that drives, I think, the artist that I know, is a kind of philosophical inquiry into the nature of who you are, your being, the world around you. And I think that practice, making art, is something that engenders that. And I think we're not philosophers, and we're not brain enough to be philosophers. But through making art and just asking questions of what you can do within this framework of a thing called art, actually goes some way to kind of answering kind of bigger questions. Or certainly does for me.
When you were at college, it's sort of like painting was dead. It was the pictures generation when sort of quotation and there was a certain degree of emptiness was the only way that we could feel. We were allowed to feel in a fashionable way. And then now
fashionable way.
Now everything seems actually much more freer to us because it seems that everything is allowable, and that seems great because you can do anything, which doesn't mean to say you have to do everything. You do bits that you want to do, but if you want to make work that is by going out and sketching in the landscape and drawing clouds, it's sort of allowable now. If you want to make sort of have a factory producing big steel sculptures, it's sort of allowable now. And it seems so much more allowable, and I think to us it seems a great situation that we're in now, not an awful depressing one. If we look back where we were sort of 20, 30 years ago, it did seem, not 20 years ago, it did seem more depressing. It did seem as if we were in a cul-de-sac, but we don't seem to be in culturally.
We used to wear black clothes as well.
Yeah.
Also making art's a clumsy thing. You don't have all the answers when you set off making something, and actually the process of trying to make things, to solve the problems, work the solutions out, becomes the work.
Yeah.
And that's actually what your body of work becomes. Your failure attempts to solve the conditions of your practice and express yourself and do all the things you want to do.
And then become part of a context which we call contemporary art.
And that's always seen later by the historians as being prescriptive, but it's always descriptive. It's always afterwards, after the fact, say, oh well, he was thinking about this and he was doing that, and he came up with, and none of that's true. Everybody's fumbling, and I think that's totally legitimate. Experimentation, failure, they're all great things.
and hopefully inbuilt into the work, into the region.
Yeah. Well, I think to many, these paintings actually almost appear as if there were a lot of events taking place, and you've stopped them at a particular stage, but it could continue. It's not like these are the big statements that you change one little bit of it and the whole thing absolutely changes, and they're not precious moments. They are actually part of a process which could carry on.
Well, I think importantly for me, I kind of want to reference that by the fact that everything is sliding off the edge of the frame. It's like beyond the painting, into the world. Most of my shapes, most of everything, most of the shapes and the signs and the blocks of colour just are deliberately sliding away. John?
I thought that the last question was a very good question about information overload and kind of pluralism, and I guess so far you three have tended to talk about sort of critique of expression plus roughly process. So mainly two themes as far as I can see.
Yeah.
And I think the thing around pluralism is interesting because it sets up what seems to be a contradiction, which is you seem to agree on a critique of expression, which one version of that is a critique of subjectivity. But apparently, although we're not kind of drawing conclusions, but it seems like what you're proposing as the solution to the pluralist overload of information is subjectivity. So you do what you want to do as an artist subject. That seems to me a problem.
Yeah, it is a problem, but I don't think we're saying that. But sorry,
Well, I think that's what I'm hearing from Len and Keith. Maybe I'm mishearing you, but it seems like you're saying you appeal to kind of the sovereign subject artist, and inevitably what else are you going to appeal to? But actually, on another level, that's your kind of, is that the return of the Kuni via the back door?
is that the question?
Not to express the subject, but some kind of subject is kind of,
I think yes, it is actually. It's a really good question, John, because yes, it is, and I think, but it's almost like secretly, almost postmodernists really want that, and I think it's that kind of on. But I don't think it's as simplistic as being a kind of oppositional difference. So de Kooning bad, everything will hold being good, for example. I think it's a constantly evolving dialogue between different frames of reference, not just within painting, but in the world, that work its way into both the objective and the subjective. And I think so we're not wanting some kind of Arcadian return to the subjective. As using your term, the artist is sovereign subject. I think that the business of art, of course, needs that to some degree. But at the same time, I think what we're really trying to argue here is that is only a part of the process of thinking and making, and about the problems, about what it is to be an artist. Because I think all the art, especially Keith and especially Ben, they do definitely, what seems to be inbuilt in their work is asking the question, what is art? Why am I doing this? It seems to be embedded within their practice.
Sure, no, I understand that. I don't disagree with you, but I think there's a kind of, seems to me there's a reluctance to propose anything at a level of the conversation. I think you're proposing things in your work which you're reluctant to propose in the conversation, which go beyond critique. And partly in your response to the question about decoration, the word composition came up, and various things. So it just seems to me there's a kind of reluctance to, maybe Keith's proposing something around sort of facticity of making things which are already analog. So that seems like quite a strong proposal, but in a way, most of what Mike you're saying is voiced through a kind of critique of expression. You don't seem to want to kind of own up to the kind of positive, constructive element of the work, and that seems curious.
Yeah, I think it's the way the conversation's gone, because I said we really haven't rehearsed this at all.